On that night, when the protesters were marching on the Prime Minister's residence, you had the troops deployed, the military deployed on the outskirts of Dhaka city to stop the violence, but they had all been instructed not to shoot, not to use deadly force against protesters because my mother did not want the blood of protesters on her hands. There had already been excessive use of force and violence, and she did not want any more killings. Her government never wanted to use force. Her government never authorized the use of force. The violence was incited by some other groups chanting, "We are Rajakars" in the middle of the night at Dhaka University. That's the equivalent of marching in the middle of Jerusalem chanting, "We are Nazis, we are Nazis." That enraged our students, who then attacked the protesters. The police got involved, tried to stop it. Some police members used excessive force. Our government had already formed a judicial committee to investigate those deaths. We had suspended the police officers. We had immediately instructed our student wing, Chhatra League, to refrain from violence, and the violence had stopped. But when they were marching on, and at that point, when they were marching, when they announced that they were going to march on the Prime Minister's residence and they wanted the resignation of this government, my mother's, the Prime Minister's Special Security Force and the Prime Minister's guards, they were fully prepared to defend Gun the Prime Minister's residence. But my mother said, if you do that, hundreds, if not thousands of demonstrators will die. So she did not want them, she did not want bloodshed. So instead, they took her to a secure location, and then our Air Force base. At that point, my mother told my aunt, "You get on the helicopter, I'm going to stay here." My aunt called me immediately, and I persuaded my mother to leave the country. The conversation was brief. What I told her is, "No, you cannot stay." She said, "No, I'm not leaving my country." I said, "Look, this is a mob now. These aren't protesters. They are armed. They've already been killing police. They've been attacking police with firearms. So, at this point, if they find you, they're going to kill you, and we do not want that. If you don't want your security forces, if you don't want your special security force to defend you and shoot back, then they're going to kill you. You have to leave the country. We have to keep you safe." Well, I mean, was the U.S. directly involved? I don't know. I have no evidence. But if you look at the situation, the protests, you see, the protests were incited and inflamed every step of the way. When the protests first started, they were peaceful. Our police were guarding them. And the protest wasn't against the government action. Our government had reduced quotas years ago when there were the first round of protests against quotas. The quotas were reinstated by the courts due to a case. And our government had filed an appeal against that. That means our government had already was fighting the quotas, and it was going to fight the quotas in the Supreme Court. We were just waiting for the Supreme Court to hear it. So, and then at that point, someone took a statement of my mother and twisted it online and spread it tremendously online, which is she had said that we don't want families of Rajakars getting government jobs. Now, they twisted that into my mother calling the protesters Rajakars, which she never did. So clearly, some agency was very, very active online in using social media to inflame the situation. Then, on the night of July 15th, when our government had appealed to the Supreme Court, when our government had announced that we want the quotas to be rescinded, then someone started marching at Dhaka University in the middle of the night chanting, "We are Rajakar, we are Rajakar." To understand that, that would be of someone marching in Jerusalem in the middle of the night chanting, "We are Nazis, we are Nazis." This inflamed our student activists. Our student activists attacked the protesters. The police stepped in to try to stop the violence. Some police members used excessive force. Our government immediately told our student activists, our Bangladesh Chhatra League, to back down, not to fight, and the violence was stopped. We formed a judicial commission, a 3-member judicial commission to investigate the deaths, and we suspended all the police officers that used excessive force. So our government did everything to quell the violence. The violence was never ordered by our government. The violence was instigated by some unknown party, specifically in the middle of the night, chanting, "We are Rajakar, we are Rajakar." This was done deliberately. And then, that didn't stop there. Then the protesters started attacking the police, and they didn't just attack, they were armed with firearms. Now, where did these protesters get firearms? You can only a foreign intelligence service can supply firearms in a country. No, I don't think she misread it. The problem was what we didn't expect was someone constantly inciting the protest. That we did whatever we could to. We met all the protesters' demands. Our government met all the protesters' demands. Tried to stop the violence immediately when it started. But clearly, somebody kept inciting it, and that was something that was unexpected. And especially the protesters. The protesters being firearms was the most shocking thing. That was completely unexpected.
Right.
And
now,
here
India has.
I'm looking at a Bangladeshi newspaper. Well, 232 people at least. The newspapers are reporting at least 232 have been killed since my mother left the country. So that is after. More people have died since she left the country than in the first days of the protests. You know, actually, in a way, I welcome it because these people have been championed by the minority, by the elite, and by the West. I personally believe, having seen the functioning of government and having served as a government, as an honorary advisor to the government, that it is one thing to be appointed to handpick and to be handpicked and appointed to a position. It's a whole other thing to govern, and without political experience, without governance experience, it is very, very difficult to run a country. So I'm actually curious to see how they perform, whether they are even capable of running the country. However,
Right.
The point is that our Supreme Court has ruled, and our Constitution says that a non-elected government cannot run a country, even for 1 minute. Right now, this is an unconstitutional government. They are not elected. So there is no democracy in Bangladesh. So they are talking about democracy, but there is no democracy. So what do you have to do if you want to have democracy? You have to have elections. And our Constitution is very clear on this provision that from the day Parliament is dissolved, new elections have to be held within 90 days. There is no way around it. No, there is no such thing as an interim government in the Constitution which can stay in power beyond 90 days. That does not exist. So I believe that this government's priority should be to hold elections as soon as possible. And definitely it has to be held within 90 days.